The Public Sphere, an explanation by Anthony Puglia. The public sphere is an ideology coined by German sociologist and philosopher Jürgen Habermas. The basic concept for the public sphere was that it was a realm of our social life in which a public opinion can be formed. According to Habermas, there are certain criteria that the public sphere must maintain in order to remain truly democratic. 1. It remains independent of commercial exchange. Number 2. It is nurtured by reliable information. 3. It is anchored in a social setting. 4. It is a site of rational debate and public opinion. And number 5. It ultimately stands for democracy. This concept was illustrated back in the early 1800s in Europe. During this era, most states were dominated by government ideals, leaving little opportunity for the private sphere to participate in socio-political decisions. This political inclusivity is what sparked the wealthier middle class to participate in methods of autonomy revolving around the political and social aspects of the state. This is known as the bourgeois public sphere. Habermas argued that the bourgeois public sphere was inclusive, being open and accessible to all. These people gathered in social areas such as coffee houses and public salons where there was room for all to participate in rational discourse. We say rational discourse because the conversation must be justifiable and seen as reasonable by all who are participating and aims for the common good. However, when it came to the bourgeois public sphere, many theorists critiqued Habermas's findings as certain social groups were excluded as a public. In particular, women, peasants, and those who were a visible minority were excluded from the bourgeois public sphere. Critical theorist Nancy Fraser critiques Habermas's concept of the public sphere as a place where typically bourgeois men dominated the public sphere, leaving the seemingly domestic bourgeois women to build counterpublics within the private sphere and use their femininity as springboards for public activity. These counterpublics are often seen as subordinates in the bourgeois public sphere. In order for the bourgeois public sphere to truly be all-inclusive, social hierarchies must be removed in order for this to be true. Fraser also argues that a series of counterpublic spheres is more liberal than one single public sphere. Social theorist Michael Warner also explains, a counterpublic maintains its awareness of its subordinate status. Only through participation can a counterpublic project their ideals and form discourse. As time went on, critical discussion in the public and private spheres began to gain momentum. The public sphere began to develop through the rise of the periodical press. However, by having these weekly texts distributed, the need for spoken discourse began to decline, as media agencies and the press began to speak out on behalf of the bourgeois public sphere. Habermas argues that by reducing the restriction of discourse through media and free speech, Parliament was publicly scrutinized and became more accountable to the citizens. In more recent years, this concept is evidently shown in the social movement Occupy Wall Street, a protest movement that focused around social and economic inequalities. Occupy Wall Street was a movement branching off of the Arab Spring, where an Egyptian people took over public spaces to protest the oppression and lack of job opportunities they faced in their daily lives. The whole concept of the Occupy movement was to facilitate rational discourse within a public that gathered in a common area, much like in Habermas's public sphere. However, since there were restrictions placed on the city of New York, there were limitations as to where the public could form and protest. The occupiers created a human microphone system where a short message would be relayed and echoed throughout the crowd, as Calhoun describes this as a demonstration of participatory democracy. In order for those receiving the message to interact, hand gestures devised for the General Assembly were used. This allowed the mass audience to better convey their thoughts without having to disrupt and slow down the proceedings. The main difference between Occupy and Habermas's public sphere is that in Occupy, all people had equal opportunity to speak and interact, no matter their race or social status. Whereas one of the main criticisms of the bourgeois public sphere was that it was typically wealthy men who facilitated the discourse. The ultimate downfall of Occupy was in fact that it operated as an open network rather than in a hierarchy. As Calhoun explains, the democratic legitimacy made challenges in building and enduring an effective movement. By having Occupy spread across America, different occupiers had different motivations, and overall, the discourse became distorted. Overall, the Occupy movement is a great example to relate to how the public and the private spheres can form and counteract the hegemonies of society. Though there are various critiques to Habermas's notion of the public sphere, the concept of individuals coming together to participate in rational discourse is evident. Today, we engage in public discourse from the comfort of a private area. We can tweet, post in online forums, or share media texts that allow us to become active participants. The public discussion has gone far beyond the 1800s coffee houses and moved into the palms of our hand through social media and mobile devices. I hope this video adds some clarity to how the public sphere functions and the principles and critiques that follows. Thank you very much for watching.